This meeting is being recorded.
All right, welcome to Embodied Memories, Narratives of African Diasporic Religious Communities. And this particular installment is of Embodied Memories of Ginen, which is our special focus on Vodouyizan in the United States. So we are so honored and privileged to have with us Houngan Dr. Patrick Bellegarde-Smith, whom we met when he gave us his life history interview. And now we're going to we're in for a special treat because we're going to be talking about Voodoo's African and Haitian Voodoo religious concepts, some very specific ones that Houngan Patrick is going to talk to us about. So we're in for a really special treat. Houngan Patrick is a professor emeritus of Africology, Houngan Patrick?
No, it was changed several years ago. It's African and African Diasporic Studies.
Okay, right. So African and African, he's a professor emeritus of African and African American Studies. So he's not new to this, he's true to this. And shout out to AAAS because I was a AAAS major. My bachelor is in African American Studies. So super excited to have this conversation. Welcome, Houngan Patrick.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Okay, so first thing that I want to say is that for our listeners and our viewers, if you look in the description of this video, you're going to see a link. So it's really important that if you want to be able to follow along our conversation better, there's a handout that we're going to be discussing, and it's going to be available to you at a link in our description. So look for that link, Nation Building National Identity in Voodoo. There's a link to it, and that's the actual handout that we're going to be discussing today. So Houngan Patrick, I want to share with saying that I'm really fascinated by this handout. I recently did a presentation about my own walk as a scholar priestess here at Stanford, and there's a group here called Black and Spiritual. Shout out to the Black and Spiritual Collective. This was a group it was formed by students who wanted to explore African and indigenous religious practices. And so they got together. There's also some staff members and faculty members who are major parts of it, but primarily it's something that was started by students here. So I gave a presentation to that group a couple of months back. And as a part of my presentation, I used this handout that you had sent me a couple of years ago that has all of these African and Haitian Voodoo religious concepts in it. And they were fascinated by it. I mean, we just had such a great conversation, just reading over these concepts, making connections to it from our own lives. We also had a lot of questions. So I'm just really excited to be able to talk to you more about it and to hear, from you, what was your motivation for creating this handout and kind of like the story behind it and how you've used it in your own classes.
Well, that's a good point to start. I came up with it many years ago, and I don't recall the specifics of it. It just came to me all of a sudden, and I wrote it down, and it made sense to me. And I have shared it with students down the years, and it turns out that students, even from different religious backgrounds, related to it to a very large extent. But the one thing also that I found fascinating is that it fits pretty much the patterns that we see in other indigenous religions, whether we're talking about Native American religions in the plural sense, or even other religions on the African continent, in Asia, and that kind of thing. So it seems to be a universal pattern. And one of my students, who is now a rabbi, and they said to me, because they are interested in the mystical part of Judaism, for instance, and they said to me that it was very similar to what she was studying in terms of Kabbalah and Judaism. But what also is of importance, I think, is that when we think of Vodou or other indigenous religions, we think in terms of the ritual. And I love the ritual. I could attend a ceremony if I could afford it every single night. Um, but it's more than ritual. Rituals are important, obviously, to human beings. We all have our rituals, personal or collective. But I wanted to get at some of the ideas that are at the foundation of African religious systems. Uh,
Mhm.
and it arcs into the spiritual dimension of it and the mystical side of it as well. It's, for instance, if I'm interested in Roman Catholicism or the Protestant churches, and there are hundreds of those, I may choose to talk to people in the street in terms of what it means to them. But I also may want to speak to address the issues raised by the doctors of the church, St. Augustine, for instance, or St. Teresa, and know how they felt about it, because this is also part of the religion, and folks in the streets will not necessarily understand what it is that the doctors of the church were talking about. And so those concepts and
Mhm.
those precepts and the context that is established by that list, I think, gives us another entry into uh, uh, the mystical views of what Vodou is all about.
Oh, found fantastic. I love it. I love it. Um, I am just, you know, just yeah, this is thrilling to me. And the fact that you mentioned, well, I don't want to go in so deeply, but I think, you know, the fact that it resonates so much with, you know, different, what you said, different indigenous religions, with, you know, with the mystical aspects, right, of Judaism, more mystical with Kabbalah, you know, with African traditions, you know, that I think that's really a testament to what Haitian voodoo is, right? So maybe if we can kind of, before we kind of go into it, if you like, can you talk a little bit about the that the nature of Haitian voodoo that kind of pulls from these different um religious traditions and indigenous practices?
Well, I'm not too sure that Vodou is a religion. It
Mm-hmm.
is more of a spiritual discipline than a religion, actually,
Mm-hmm.
even though we do have our rituals, of course, and those may or may not vary from place to place in Haiti proper. And so we might speak in terms of Vodou in the plural. But it's important to know that there are some major ideas that bring it all together. And oftentimes we get bogged down in very specific kind of items, which are fine, but we need to know that it goes above and beyond. And the spiritual dimension and the mystical dimension is universal, and which is
Mm-hmm.
why I find it interesting that indigenous religions have a lot in common, and they are mired in science. They are very much anchored in science. Of the natural world, for instance, comes into play in terms of this, and it sort of reminds us that we're all the same. And all different, of course, but all the same at the basic level of understanding. And that includes everything in nature, and our very nature is very much anchored on this planet. And so everything is connected, everything is related, and it's very difficult to isolate ourselves from the rest of the world, from others, other human beings, but also from all the creatures that exist in the planet itself. And the natural forces, we're talking about esoteric forces, we're talking about mystical forces, we're talking about energy. And the physicists will tell you that all things are energy if you go to the other
Mm-hmm.
side of campus where they study the hard sciences. But the difference between religion and physics, the religionists will tell you that all things are conscious energy.
Mm-hmm.
It has a consciousness behind it, and we are ultimately energy and spirits. Spirits that happen to have a body at the present moment, and we will at some point relinquish that body, and we remain who we were, first and foremost spiritual creatures.
Okay, thank you so much. This is, this is covering so much of what is, of what is here on the handout. And I just want to, to dive into some of that. I want to dive into some of that. Some of the ones that you kind of that you just talked about. I thought that there was one. I'm not seeing it now, so maybe I need to start with another one. But when you talked about the energy, right? And there's a couple here about energy here, which is well, this is beautiful. Nature is and must be revered. The energy fields that course through it are the divine work of deities.
Indeed. And deities, I use the word deities rather than gods, for instance, because African religious systems have been monotheistic. And this is something that was not true necessarily of the ancient Greeks, or perhaps the Romans. But all the deities that we talk about, I see them as facets of a diamond, as part and parcel of the ultimate reality of the one supreme entity. And I say entity rather than, it's not a creature, but those deities were created by God, if you want to use that word, by God herself. And so they're all related and related to us at the very same time, because we are spirits in our very nature. So we connect with them, we connect with the ancestors who are now spirits, and who may, according to most African systems, reincarnate into this world. And so that this is a powerful statement about how unified everything is. We're talking about a unified field. And science looks at it that way. And there is no reason for indigenous religions not to see it in its original form. And that is a powerful statement. And that is also not in accordance with what we know of science. Now, we do have stories of origin. We do have Genesis stories in all systems, but these are metaphors more than anything else, because ultimately we're talking about science. And Haitian Vodou, as is African religion, has never had a problem with science, never has. Yeah.
Indeed, indeed. And there's the, there's this other statement here about energy, right? Energy is power. Power can be achieved, leading to more energy, right?
That's
So
right.
maybe energy
Yeah.
attaching itself.
There is a Protestant minister who is a friend, and I remember him telling me 45 years ago that he was in Greece, in Athens, and he was visiting the Acropolis. And he said, and he's a Protestant minister, and he said to me he felt the presence of Aphrodite in those ruins in the Acropolis. And the thought that came to me when he told me that is, it must be sad for deities who are no longer appreciated and no longer revered. I don't say adore, but revered. And to me, there's an important distinction there. And so Aphrodite, and of course, we do have her equivalent in terms of Haitian Vodou in Ezeli Freda, for instance. And so she is who she is. And other cultures have had her as well. We need to remember that before Christianity imposed itself on Europe, that indigenous systems throughout Europe were very similar to African systems, with a plethora of deities as well. And according to the news that we get almost on a daily basis now, in terms of in terms of religion, Europeans are slowly going back to the religions of their ancestors. In places like Scotland, in places like Ireland, even in Greece, for heaven's sake. And so those religions are acquiring more credibility with Europeans themselves. And they have abandoned many of them, the church that was imposed upon them. And so they are rediscovering their roots, as it were.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. And I think it relates it to these points here about, right? Again, like what does it mean? What do these images of God look like? So I want to read two of the concepts here that I think are related, and that also connect back to what we were just talking about. So one is at the top: when you look into the cosmic mirror, the image that looks back at you is the image of God.
Indeed.
That's the
And
first one.
we are spiritual entities, first and foremost.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it is important to realize that all of us have that power. And we're directly connected to the divine source. I remember a friend of mine who since died, who said to me, "Don't you believe that Jesus is the Son of God?" So I said, "So am I."
Mm,
And therefore, if I'm the Son of God, I'm God as well. And
mm,
well, in that sense, we're all God, we're all spiritual entities deriving from that primary source. And so we are part of it, and that makes us relevant to the creation of this universe, to the cosmos itself, because our spirit were present at the moment of creation. When the Big Bang occurred, we were there,
mm.
participating in it, and we shall be there after the universe has ended. We shall be there still. So we will never disappear. So there is life after life, as well as life before life. We were always present, and we shall always be present, even if the human species disappears, as have other species on this planet.
Oh, all right. Well, that was a word. Life after life. I don't think I've ever heard it phrased
And
that way.
life before life.
It's life before life and life.
That's right. You see, Glenn, Brigitte, and Baron Samedi are my parents. And it's an unusual combination, And it gives me, I think, some access to that other side after we have left this planet. And and my mother told me after her death that she was, I said, "Well, you are dead." She says, "No, I'm not. Am I?" And she looked at me straight in the eye and says, "Am I dead?" And obviously she was not, because we had a wonderful discussion after she had left this planet. And so there is life after life, and there is life before life, so that our spirit existed before we took an actual body.
Mm-hmm.
And in the tradition, in the African traditions that we have, we wait before naming a child, because we need to know who that child is before we name him or her.
Right.
And in the Yoruba system, if we think it's grandmother who has returned, we call that child Yetunde. And if it is grandfather that has returned, we call him Babatunde. And so we have to wait for a while before we can name that child, because we don't know quite who it is that has shown up again. And so before we were born, we were, and we remain who we are. And we keep coming back, apparently, according to African systems.
And there's this tenet here that says reincarnation is as natural as is recycling to the natural world.
And this is a universal concept, by the way. Asians have it,
Right.
Africans have it. And so it is in Europe that it's been downgraded to non-existence. And that's unfortunate. That is unfortunate. But it seems to me that when, for instance, my students read that particular sentence, you're amazed at how many people believed in it, but it is not part of the religion, but they still believe in it anyway,
Right.
which is kind of interesting. Yeah. And there's something universal about it, because it is found in all cultures just about. Now, if one were to say that it's real, that reincarnation is real, if you are an organized church, you might lose control of your flock. Therefore, it is a good thing to downgrade this particular element in the system. because the priest will tell you what is. Now, if you keep coming back, you have more access to the divine than the priest would like you to have access to it. And so it becomes significant in that way. And somewhere in the Bible, and I don't remember exactly the passage, someone or some people asked Jesus, "Are you Elijah who's
Yes,
come back?"
right.
And I wish I knew where it was in the Bible. In other words, you can see elements of reincarnation in the Old Testament, but the church does its best to ignore these kinds of passages. It is inconvenient to think of it that way.
Right, right. Because it's certainly, my understanding is, it's a known part of Judaism,
Yeah,
right? Like the
exactly.
concept of, right, of
Mhm.
reincarnation. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I don't know the exact scripture, but yeah, exactly. They thought
Mhm.
that he was Elijah who was
Yeah.
reincarnated.
Mhm.
Um, so so now let's talk about these the idea of evil, right? Because I think that there's some interesting things that we have about evil, right, and the devil, that I think is worth unpacking and talking about. So I'm going to read two here. I'm going to read two of them here because there are some more. But the first is that there is no devil, there is no Satan, but there is evil.
Well, evil is a concept, and we
Mhm.
have anthropomorphized that concept by creating a whole being, who, by the way, according to Christianity, was created by God itself. And so Satan is a creature, right? And
Mhm.
why do we accord it so much power over our lives? I wonder if some religions could exist without Satan, because he seems to be, it or he seems to be central to those particular religions. Now, evil does exist. We don't need to anthropomorphize it. We don't need to create a whole
Mm.
thing around it. And my rabbi friend, who was my former student, they said to me that God is both good and evil. But you have to go into mystical Judaism to find that
Mhm.
particular understanding
Mhm.
uh, of that concept. And I would tell my students, it depends on what side of the bed I wake up on in terms of being good and evil that way. Or before, I never wanted people to see me before I had my coffee, because that was evil incarnate at that point. After I have my coffee, I'm fine. But I need it, and we're talking about strong Haitian coffee now, espresso
Okay.
style. Yeah, and that's the only coffee I drink. I cannot drink the other stuff that passes for coffee in the U.S. But
The
one does
shade,
not.
the shade.
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, I've been in this country for 56 years now, and I have never had coffee in an American home. Never. I ask for tea because no one knows how to make coffee, as far as I'm concerned. And no one can drink my coffee either because they say it's too strong, and I don't think so. But evil is an interesting concept, of course, and I think it does exist, but we don't have to create a whole persona. And there's a European philosopher who said something interesting, and I don't recall the name of that individual. He said, those who believe in Satan already belong to him.
Mm.
And I don't believe in Satan, therefore I cannot belong to it. And Satan does not exist in African systems, because we're talking about everything being unified. And so God can be perfectly evil, God can be perfectly good. And I see God as pretty much cool, as a cool cucumber. And so it all depends how you hit it. But you see, the deities and God itself, above all these kinds of struggles. Those are struggles that human beings have by definition because we have a body. But I don't know that it is necessary for the spirit world to think in terms of good and evil. It's not necessary for them. They're above all of that.
Mm. So, okay, so here's something that, and before I read the next one, I just want to pick back up on something that you mentioned about your rabbi friend talking about the nature of God being, I don't know what was the term. Did they use the terms good and evil or good and bad?
That they good and evil are embodied into the same spirit.
The same that they're embodied, right?
The same, yeah.
And from my teachings and my own study, my cursory study of Kabbalah, the concept of Satan, is known as the opponent,
Yes.
right? Is the opponent. And so when we think about this, right, the idea of an opponent, right? An opponent is there to challenge you, right?
Yes.
But not necessarily to overtake you, to destroy you, right?
That's right.
It's to create
That's
challenges for you to overcome. And then in overcoming those challenges, then you're going to become stronger. You're going to become better at whatever that task is.
Exactly.
Right?
Well, from that standpoint, you're never given a burden that you cannot go over. In other words, we're given the kinds of struggles that we can win over. Because and that is an important concept. But it's interesting because as a young person, 8, 9, 10 years old, I knew I was going to become a priest, but I just didn't know in which religion. It didn't occur to me I did not know at that point. And I went to parochial school in Port-au-Prince. And so there was that element in my life. But also, as a young person, I collected books on Kabbalah. And I had several dozen of those books. And I went to a Haitian Vodou ceremony in Miami, Florida. And the Haitian spirit that manifested looked at me and said to me, "Get rid of those books. It's no longer your path. It is no longer your path. Your path is the African path." That's what I was told. So I put them all in boxes and gave them to a young African American who is Jewish. And I said, "Keep them in your basement. When you're 40, you can open that box and you do what you will with it." So I need to ask him what he did with it, because he disappeared from my life. So I need to know what happened to those books of mine. But it was no longer my path, which means what? That it may have been my path in the past, or was my path in the past, to use a different formulation here. But the Haitian spirit will tell you what direction that you're supposed to go in. And a good friend of mine who became a Roman Catholic priest, a Black Brazilian, was going to become a Pai de Santo and in Candomblé. And he was told in this particular case by Shango, he says, "We love you, you are our child, but no, you cannot become a Pai de Santo. We want you to be in the Roman Catholic Church. That's where we need you at the moment. We need you there." And so they will direct you to other religious systems as well. So you need not to practice with us necessarily, but we need you in that particular function at this point. So he became a Roman Catholic priest, not the Candomblé Pai de Santo.
Thank you so much. Thank you thank you for sharing this. This is super, super important, because these are the things that we don't find in books. These are the things that, most people don't have the lived experience to understand, that's going to help to shape their consciousness, right? Of the meaning of spirit, of the meaning of spiritual practice, of their, of their whole identity. Right? So much of it comes from our own lived experience with talking to spirit directly, or having experiences in many different traditions, right? And understanding that, we're the same person, but we may have connections to different traditions, right? But you're going to be called to whatever it is that spirit is calling you for at the moment, and to be receptive to it.
Exactly. But these are instructions, these are conversations that we had before our birth, actually. And so we have to be set straight after we have come into this world. In Haiti, for instance, it is extremely common, and elsewhere in terms of indigenous societies, to practice several religions at once. And many
Mhm.
of the priestesses, many of the mambo who are part of my initiation have always told me, in order to be a good Vodouyizan, you have to be a good Catholic.
Mm,
And we go to church and we pay sometimes for the mass itself.
mhm.
And we go to a ceremony on Friday night, Saturday night. And at 5 in the morning, we take a shower, we change clothes, and we go to the church for a mass that we had paid for ourselves. And people will not have a problem practicing several religions at once. And why not? Now, before I knew all this, when I was a soldier in the US Army, because I did go into the Army during the Vietnam War, in order to get out of certain unpleasant situations, I would go to 3 services every Sunday, which allowed me to avoid kitchen police, KP. And so I would go to the synagogue, I would go to a Protestant service and to the Catholic service. And it was
Okay.
fine with me. It was fine with me. So I did all 3 at this time. And I have no problems going to various churches. And when I first came to the U.S. and attended a few services in Black Protestant churches, there was a sense there was a sense of commonality. I felt to a certain extent that I was in a Vodou ceremony as well.
Mm,
It is Zora Neale Hurston, in one of her books that talks
mhm.
about that African Americans, Black people in the US, worship old gods by new names. In other
Mm,
words, we have not forgotten where we came from. We just call it differently because we have had to kowtow to the powers that be. We have had to compromise with the system itself. In the very same way that we have hidden our deities with Roman Catholic saints.
right.
And now in Brazil, they're moving away from it. Someone like Max Beauvoir had moved away from it, but many
Mhm.
Haitian Houngan and Mabo have not moved away from hiding African deities with Roman Catholic saints, and that they will come perhaps, well, this will happen, but ultimately it doesn't matter, ultimately.
Um, why do you say why doesn't it matter?
Well, it's interesting because those were guises. I don't think there's anything profound. For instance, in Cuba, when you say that Shango, a very male deity in terms of the way people conceive of it, is Santa Barbara, a woman. And when you ask the Cubans, okay, who was Santa Barbara? What does she represent? Why is she Shango in the Yoruba system? And the only thing they can tell you is that she wears a white cloak and she has a crown, which is a tower on top of her head. And when you ask a Haitian person, why is Dambala St. Patrick? They will say,
Mhm.
well, he wears green and white, and he's got serpents at his feet, and the serpents are what's important, not St. Patrick himself. Well, tell me about the life of St. Patrick. I know nothing
Right.
about the life of St. Patrick. I know nothing of that life. I don't know anything about Santa Barbara. I don't know anything about Saint Jacques, just that they are wearing the appropriate colors.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so, it's a Floyd. Obviously, we were forbidden to drum. We were forbidden to practice our religions. It was obligatory that all enslaved Africans be baptized as soon as they arrived in the colonies and converted to Christianity for the reasons that we know. And so we had to dissimulate behind Roman Catholic saints, and we had to pretend to do other things, and even our martial arts had to be disguised as dance because they were
Mm.
forbidden, and everything African was forbidden in the colonies this side of the Atlantic. And so we had to hide. I don't know that it's necessary to hide any longer.
Mhm. Thank you. Thank you. Uh, gosh, I mean, there's just so much richness here. And I want, before we move on from like this topic of evil, we've moved on from it, right? But there's another point in here that I think is really rich, and I'm curious to hear you, talk more about it. You're really unpack it for us, and that is this one that says there are no sins, certainly none that is original, but there are taboos.
Yeah, you see,
Yeah.
science tells us that Adam and Eve never existed. And therefore, there cannot be an original sin because the other ones that presumably had committed the original sin. And people will assume it was of a sexual nature, and folks are terrified in the Puritan world that we have inherited from the original European Americans that came to this land in the 1600s. One assumes that it's sexual, and there's an anti-sex sentiment that has always prevailed in the United States from that day forward, from the 1600 to now. The Brazilians have an interesting saying: there are no sins below the equator, which is kind of interesting. So people were puzzled by that. And I said to my students, okay, look at yourselves, find your equator, what's below your equator. And they all would
Mhm.
burst out laughing. And Brazilians are much freer in terms of all these things than North Americans are. So there are taboos, certainly. There are certain things, and your taboos may not be my taboos.
Right. Right.
And I'm not allowed to have liquor, for instance. Once in a while, I cheat and I have a little bit, but if I have more than a bottle of beer, I get a splitting headache. So I know to stop at that point, and other people can handle liquor much better than I do. So I said I would be a cheap date in that sense. But sins will differ from time to time, I would imagine. And when I was in parochial school, where we had to confess our sins, and I was a small child, I had to make up sins because I didn't think I had any. I had to come up with some sins, so
Look at that.
I lied about it, which is interesting. So it's another sin because I
Right.
was lying about sins I never committed. I was too young to see them as sins. But they are taboos, certainly. Certain religions will talk about, because of the original sin, that we're born sinful, we're born bad, we're born negative, we're just bad people, and the church will redeem us. And I think I was born good. I don't think that I was born with original sin or any sin at all. And I suppose the very act of being born or being created was sinful. And this goes back again to that concern that some individuals from Western Europe had about sex and how bad it was. I never saw it as bad, but and so when they went to Africa, they wanted us to cover up, which is
Right.
kind of interesting, because the body itself is sinful, right? The distinction made between the physical body and the spiritual dimension of the human being, I don't see it as necessarily in conflict.
Okay. So thank you for that that clarifying for that clarification. Because when I read that, it really resonated with me because I'm very how can I put this? I guess I'm more of like a Puritan Voodooism.
Okay, all right.
Very kind of, strict idea. This is appropriate.
Mhm.
No, this is not
Yeah,
reglement. No, this is that, the other, right? And
yeah,
there can be, but what that comes from is my own relationship,
yes,
to my spirits, and knowing, right, and them being very clear with me. No, we want you to go in this particular path,
yes,
right? And so the conflicts that I've that I think that me and that some other people may have encountered is that if you try to follow this idea of universal sin, right, or of a kind of like a universal taboo, no,
mhm,
that's not going to work,
yeah,
right? Because everybody's path is different. But from
yeah,
Christianity, right,
mhm,
we come with these ideas that no, everybody can't do this. Everybody shouldn't do this. Everybody shouldn't. But then we see our friends doing things and we try to do it. No, we get
yeah.
slapped right away. We're not supposed to do it.
Because the church and churches in general want to regulate our behavior and regulate everything about ourselves as individuals. And I think things need to be a lot looser than that because we're not exactly the same.
Right.
when it comes to our behaviors, and we need to account for those differences as well. And it comes from a very Puritan ethos, which in the U.S. comes out of England. And these people were chased out of England and ended up in the U.S. and immediately committed genocide on the Native Americans, who did not want to conform to British rules. It's really interesting because the universality concept that
Mm-hmm.
comes from Europe sort of infects everything, all the disciplines in academia as well. Now, we have a discipline at universities called psychology, and
Mm-hmm.
psychology wants itself to be universal. Well, also we have in Black studies, certainly in my department in Black studies, Black psychology, which
Right.
is different from psychology. Psychology, the default is white folks. Now, when the Gudu occurred in Haiti, the earthquake of 2010, for instance, there
Mm-hmm.
was a plane load that came in from Germany filled with German psychologists and psychiatrists. None of them spoke French or Creole. Now, French would not have helped us because 95 all of us speak Creole,
Right.
very few of us speak French. And they landed in Haiti and they were told, are you going to talk to the Haitian psychologists, the Association of Haitian Psychologists? Said, oh, they have psychologists? Yes, they
Right.
do.
I
They didn't
remember
know
that.
that Haiti had psychologists. And they said, okay, we'll go see the president of the Haitian Psychological Association. And he himself told me at a conference that we both attended, he said all they wanted for the Haitian psychologists is for them to be used as interpreters. So, in other
Mm.
words, German psychology or European psychology is so wonderful that it applies to every people on the planet. And so the Haitians were very well trained and knew their population and knew their country, were just going to be translators for those German folks. Now, the arrogance and the racism
Yeah.
of thinking that way is incredible. And they never felt that they were being racist. And incompetent on top of this. Why would German psychology apply to Haitians? We are a different society altogether with a different
Right.
history. But universality at that in that way does not quite work for me. And
Right.
this is why we have had to have departments of Black studies on US campuses. And Black
Mm-hmm.
psychology is different from white psychology.
Right. Absolutely. Right. It's
Yeah.
this idea of the tabula rasa,
Yeah.
right? Right. Which
Yes,
is this colonial racist idea. It's like,
that's
well,
right.
you don't have anything,
Yeah.
so we're going to introduce these technologies to you. But what we do have, this is a segue. We have something that's great, divination. And so here's what you had to say about divination. Divination, the future is knowable as tendencies and fragments, as time wraps around itself. This is poetry, Uganda. This is your creative expression. This is your poetry.
Think in terms of a symbol that we have for eternity, right? Like an eighth on its side,
Yes,
that it wraps
infinity.
around itself and that kind of thing. Yeah. And um, look, it doesn't say that this is exactly what's going to happen. What it says is where you are now, and if you pursue that course, if you continue on that road, this is what's likely to happen to you.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have the free will to change the course of our
Right,
situation.
right.
Now, in terms of that, and I was to tell my students, well, and you concentrate and you say, well, this is where you are now, and this is where you're going to end up unless you change. I said, well, I'm obese, I'm fat, and if I continue that course, I may die early of a heart attack. If I choose to do something about my health, I may die a little, it may take me longer to die, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, in other words, if you follow the course of action that you have now undertaken, this is likely to happen to you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not any big secret. Recently, I have outlived both my parents at this point, so it's all gravy for me, I guess. And I asked my doctor a few months ago, I said, I would like you to get me to 75. And he says, I cannot guarantee that I can get you to 75, but I will get you to 80 if you lose 100 pounds.
Okay.
He laughed, we had a good time, we laughed together, and that was it. Now, good luck for me losing 100 pounds. But and that to me, it addresses what that particular statement that you cited, because if you continue that course of event, you may not live to 75. If you lose 100 pounds, you may live to 80. And so we'll see. We'll see. I'm not going to lose 100 pounds because, look, I'm not overly concerned by death. I'm not concerned about it. I'm not worried about it. And I do not fear it. And you go back to the very last statement on that sheet and you will see. Yeah.
Right. The fear of death will kill you.
Yeah. And my mother, when she was dying, we had some interesting conversations on her deathbed. And at first she was reluctant. And I chided her. I said, look, your family, your parents, your aunts, your sisters, your brothers all died very nicely while you're being so difficult. And at the end of her life, her very last word were, I have helped myself. In other words, I have accepted it and I no longer fear it. I do not fear death.
Okay.
And she said it in French, je me suis aidé. I have helped myself. And when we asked her, did your father help you? Did your grandmother? She was very close to her grandmother. No, I have helped myself, not my father, not my grandmother. And her grandmother, by the way, was my great grandmother. And I knew her. She was born in 1858.
Oh, wow.
1858. And I knew that woman. And I'm told by older members of my family that I was her favorite great grandchild.
Oh, wow.
And she still talks to me.
That is awesome. I think that you mentioned her in your life history interview. Did she play an important role in your initiation? Yeah,
That's
was
right.
that her? Yeah.
Yes.
So if you want to know more about it, then you need to watch. Those who are listening and watching, then you need to watch Uncle Patrick's life history interview where he talks about his really special relationship with his great grandmother.
Yes, and I'm writing a book chapter on her as we speak. Oh. And the part of the title is Nombrit Maman la Cousa. The umbilical cord of your mother is buried in that yard, which is an African concept, by the way.
Yes.
Nombrit, nombril, umbilical cord is buried in that yard. And it is about my great grandmother and my mother and my grandmother and the women in my family.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm looking forward to reading it. I can't wait to read it.
I'm looking forward to finishing that chapter.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So here's one that's connected. Well, there are two here. I'm going to read them together. That's connected to ancestry, right? It says right after the one on divination, imbued by wisdom, ancestors legislate. And when I dance, my ancestors dance with me.
Okay, well, it seems to me that the deities or God itself are too far removed from us to give us our law, the laws that we need to abide by. And so the ancestors were closer to us in terms of having lived that human experience, knowing what we can achieve, what we're likely to achieve. So that's the first part. When I dance, this came to me when I was in Ghana. I was in Cape Coast, and there was a traditional funeral going on, and I started dancing. And people circled around me and were able to tell me which African tribe I was from. I didn't know, but they told me in Ghana, that sort of thing. And it occurred to me certainly that my ancestors family members who have passed on were not able to dance because they had lost their physical body. So they were doing it through me. And so I felt satisfied by that realization. And my family loved to dance, and they could no longer do that. So it is my job to dance for them at this point. And I hope that the subsequent generations, after I'm gone, will not only dance for me, but they will also leave me some coffee in the morning, as I do every morning to my ancestors.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. I mean, you've just been so generous, Haungan Patrick. Thank you so much. I'm really enjoying this conversation, and I wonder, like, are there any others that that we haven't talked about, like any other of these precepts, of these concepts here that you want to touch on?
Well, this may have to wait for a different time, because I have an appointment coming up in 15 minutes.
Okay.
That I need to prepare for.
Okay. Well, I was feeling like we were coming to a close, so that's perfect.
Yes, that's right. When I dance, my ancestors dance with me. That's a good closing statement.
Yes, it is. Okay, and please leave out coffee for Haungan Patrick.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Haitian coffee.
Hey, well, I will take Puerto Rican coffee in a pinch.
Oh, you'll take Puerto Rican coffee?
Yeah,
okay.
well, my Bustelo. Because yes, that's what I had this morning, because I can access very easily Haitian coffee. In the very same time, if I don't have rum Bamako, I will use a different rum. And my ancestors would rather have that rum than none at all. So,
okay.
But I do have some Bamako. They can have that.
Wonderful. Well, we celebrate you. I give thanks to you. I give thanks to your ancestors, who are such a big part of who you are now in the present, guiding you, walking with you. So I thank them, because I know that they are there. And, and I hope to continue this connection. And I can't wait to put up this this video and to see people's comments and questions that they may have. Thank you so much for being Embodied Memories.
In praise of our common ancestry and our common heritage, our cultural heritage.
Yes.
Haiti in Africa.
Yes, Aibobo.
Aibobo. Thank you.